Good morning, everyone. I'm Muriel Bowser. I am the mayor of Washington, D.C. I am joined today by members of my administration, including D.C. Fire and the EMS team, who we'll hear from a little bit later, specifically to address questions about the district's COVID response and the deployment of the COVID vaccine. We are also joined today by Chairman Phil Mendelson, who is the chairman of the DC Council. And as has been our practice during our COVID response, Chairman Mendelson has provided his update prior to a legislative session at this press hearing with us. And so we're grateful for him being here today. But before I hand it over to Chairman Mendelson, I want to talk about the events of this weekend, and Chief Newsham will provide an update on MPD's activity. We know and we expected and we saw in previous months people who came to our city who were bent on violence against others. We know, too, that 3 of our churches had their Black Lives Matter signs destroyed. And to see the video of that footage on social media is shocking and disturbing and certainly maddening. And certainly a violation of our values as DC residents. And as it has been pointed out, to see those men burning a Black Lives Matter sign in the middle of the street that was taken from a Black church is reminiscent of violent acts of racism our country has seen before, and it is disgusting and vile and should be condemned by all Americans. We have reached out to the churches yesterday, and MPD will continue to investigate these hate crimes. We have also asked members of the community who might have video footage to also reach out to MPD's tip line. So that MPD will have all of that information available to it as it proceeds with these investigations. So with that, I want to turn it over to Chief Peter Newsham to provide an update on MPD's activities. He will be followed by Chairman Mendelson, who will provide his update. Chief.
All right, good morning. Thank you, Mayor. I am Pete Newsham. I'm the Chief of Police for the Metropolitan Police Department. As the Mayor said, we had events this weekend. We anticipated unrest as a result of the anti-Trump and pro-Trump groups that were coming to the city, and we had just that. It was very similar to what we saw a few weeks ago at the Million MAGA March, with some folks that were intent on getting into physical confrontations with others. We were fully operational for the event. We had our Joint Operations Command Center activated. We had multiple partners participating with us, including our friends at DC Fire and EMS that assisted us through the weekend. On Friday, December 11th, we made 5 arrests at 2 separate scenes. There was 1 arrest in the 800 block of Vermont, and there were 4 in the 1500 block of K Street. It was 2 incidents. Between 10:45 a.m. and 2 a.m. Sunday, 10:45 a.m. on Saturday and 2 a.m. on Sunday, we made 33 arrests. I'm going to give you the lead charge in those arrests. 11 folks were arrested for simple assault. 10 were arrested for assault on a police officer. 1 was arrested for an assault with a dangerous weapon, a knife. 6 were arrested for disorderly conduct. 2 were arrested for weapons violations, and 2 were for release violations. 1 was for resisting arrest. It was 26 males and 7 females. Home addresses that we were able to determine, 6 were from the District of Columbia, 7 were from Maryland, 3 were from Virginia, 14 were from other states, and those 14 come from states like New York, California, Tennessee, Arizona, Ohio, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Utah, Florida, Minnesota, and Texas. And 3 of them we were unable to determine their home addresses. We had 8 officers injured. One of the officers was seriously injured. He had multiple fractures in his face and a laceration on his face. He was hit with an unknown object. And as the mayor mentioned, we had a very disturbing situation where at least 4 churches in the city had destruction of property at their churches. One was the Mount Vernon. These are the ones that we know of: Mount Vernon Place United Methodist, Metropolitan AME, Asbury United Methodist, and Luther Place Memorial Church. What I would say with regards to the destruction of property that we saw at the churches, that type of thing will not be tolerated here in the District of Columbia. We will be releasing some very good images of the suspects in a couple of those cases. We would ask the public, if you have any information as to who those suspects are, please call us on 202-727-9099, or you can text us at 50411. Again, that type of behavior will not be tolerated in the District of Columbia, and we will do everything that we possibly can to identify the folks involved and make sure that they're held accountable for those actions. And that's all that I have.
Thank you, Chief. Mr. Mendelson?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief. Good morning to everyone. As the Mayor indicated, since the start of the pandemic, we've been combining the press conference that I have over the next day's legislative agenda with the Mayor's Monday press conference, and I appreciate the collaboration. Thank you. I do want to begin with this. What should have been a beautiful weekend was ruined by white supremacists who came to our city seeking violence. I'm appalled, and my colleagues are appalled and disgusted by the hate and destruction caused by these white nationalists, and hope that all of the perpetrators are brought to justice. These acts cannot and will not be tolerated in the district. As I indicated, we have a legislative meeting tomorrow. It will begin with a committee of the whole meeting at noon. We've changed our meeting times to noon. There's the only items for business on the committee of the whole agenda are markup of 4 resolutions which concern appointments or confirmation of nominations, and then resolutions that have been reported out of other committees, which are confirmations of mayoral nominations. And I believe that these agendas were circulated last night to the press, so if you have questions about any of the items, I'm happy to answer them. At the legislative meeting, because it's our final legislative meeting of Council Period 23, it's our 41st legislative meeting, and as I said, final meeting. Among the items for business, because there will be final readings as well as resolutions, and I have several emergencies, there's a bill that will revise the law to extend unemployment benefits. This comports with federal requirements and enables us to utilize federal money with regard to unemployment. There also will be final reading on the bill to establish a new Department of Buildings. There will be final reading on a bill that requires that cash is accepted at retail establishments. There are a few exceptions in the bill. One of those exceptions is during a public health emergency. And I mention it just because I know that's gotten some attention. The final reading on the Omnibus Public Safety and Justice Amendment Act of 2020, which contains I think it's something like 14 different titles or provisions regarding public safety. There will be final reading on a bill entitled the FOIA Tolling Temporary Amendment Act. I had mentioned this at our last press conference, that this begins the process of reinstating what the normal procedure is for any Freedom of Information Act requests. If I remember correctly, it begins in January, and we've seen that electronic communications are fairly easy for us to be able to produce. When I say us, I mean the government. And so we are relaxing what we had done at the start of the pandemic, where basically any Freedom of Information Act requests were tolled. There will be a final reading on a bill that is the first step of the Maryland, Virginia, and the district amending the Metro Compact or WMATA Compact to establish a Metropolitan Transit Police Board to handle complaints. There will be final reading on the Displaced Workers' Right to Reinstatement and Retention Amendment Act. I'm circulating probably in about half an hour an amendment in nature of a substitute that makes a number of changes to that bill. reflecting conversations I've had with other council members as well as with some industry representatives and labor union representatives, and I can say more about that if there are questions. We also will have several emergency bills. I believe it's 6. One of them is to extend the mayor's authority to continue the public health emergency until March 31st. And there are a couple other items in there. I suspect I'm going to get a question regarding utilities, that utilities provision. I'll be happy to answer those questions. And then there is an emergency that I think is getting some attention from Councilmember Silverman that would try to implement some process around attempts to reopen our schools, our public schools. And I can answer questions about that if there are any. That is very quickly a summary. I didn't go into details on any of the individual bills because I expect there might be some questions on that. Mayor, do you want me to take the questions now? And
Absolutely.
then we'll go back to the mayor if there are any questions. Yes.
Chairman, can you talk about the amendments for the, or the amendment from for the displaced worker bill that you guys discussed?
There are several amendments. One is, or there are several changes. It will be an amendment in nature of a substitute. Since I don't have my notes in front of me, I have to go by memory. The bill, as it went through first reading, applies to any hotel, restaurant defined broadly, or event, venue, and retailers with 35 or more employees. We're increasing that number to 50. There was a requirement that former employees, that is employees who were laid off, would get 10 days notice, and then they would have to respond. We've reduced that to 3 days. We also have clarified that this is, what the bill does is it says that somebody who's lost their job between March 1st and the end of the public health emergency, so that's a new provision. For hotels, it's between December 1st and the end of the public health emergency, is entitled to notice from their employer, if their employer is hiring, that they can come back to the job that they had or a similar job, but we have clarified what we mean by similar, which is substantially similar. So we don't mean that a person who was a cook can now come back and be a waiter or vice versa. But a cook can come back if there's an opening for cook, and a wait person can come back if there's an opening for wait person. So we've clarified that language. The sunset is, there is a sunset in the bill. It was December 31st, 2024, which is 4 years from now. We've reduced that to June 30th, 2024. It's a slightly shorter period of time. We estimate, though, that full recovery probably won't take place for about 5 years, so the sunset actually falls short of that. There is a provision concerning controlling interest. If there's a change in controlling interest, what we expect to see is that there will be businesses that cannot continue their ownership, and that there will be a transfer of ownership. If it's simply a transfer of ownership, then the bill would apply. For restaurants, if it's more than that, because, you know, a restaurant that is, let's say, let's say it's a sit-down tablecloth restaurant, and it sells to a pizza place, carry-out pizza place. Well, it's still a restaurant, but it's actually quite different, so it wouldn't apply there. So that's a new provision with regard to controlling interest. And I'm probably forgetting a couple of changes, but I think those are the main ones.
Got it, thank you. And then obviously you mentioned the utilities
Yes.
shut off. Your office has definitely received some pushback about that proposal. Can you kind of walk us through what your reasoning is for ending the moratorium in January but extending the public health emergency until March?
I will walk you through the reasoning and say a little bit more. We're actually going to pull that provision from the emergency so that we can work on it some more. But what's at issue here, and we're seeing this in the rental sector as well, even though what I circulated didn't address rental housing, is that what the council did at the beginning of the pandemic was to just broadly implement a moratorium. What we are seeing is that there are people who have the ability to pay rent or pay their utilities and aren't because of this moratorium on shutoffs or evictions. And that's not the intent. The intent isn't to help people who don't need help. For example, what we're seeing is that these are statistics that were given to me by my staff. For Washington Gas, 24,000 customers were in arrears a couple of months ago, but of that 24,000, only 3,600 were actually low income. Now, that's not an exact correlation, but the people we're trying to help are low income people who are struggling to pay their bills. And what we are also seeing is that individuals are not taking advantage of relief programs that are available. For energy, it is LIHEAP, the Low Income Housing and Energy Assistance Program, which actually is federal dollars. There's $15 million that's in that fund untapped. In past years, we couldn't keep up with the demand, but because of the prohibition on utility shutoffs, people aren't using those funds. And so we need to find a way of striking the right balance so that we're helping those people who need help, and where there's relief programs that are available, people are using the relief programs. The other thing I want to say is that we, at the same time that we adopted the moratorium on cutoffs, we also established a requirement on utilities to provide a payment plan. And the advantages of the payment plan include that there's a minimum term of a year to repay, that there's no fees, interest, or penalties, and that there's no reporting to credit reporting agencies of the amount subject to the plan, and that there can't be a lump sum that's due at the end of the payment plan. So all that's to the good. But what we're seeing is that very few people are actually taking advantage of the payment plan option. So I'm going to pull the provision from the emergency and work with some folks to refine this so that we really are targeting relief to those who need it, because that's what we want to do. We're all in agreement on that. Reduce the anxiety that what we're actually doing here is hurting people, because that's not our intent.
So will you be releasing a new provision later today, or what?
No.
Okay.
I'm circulating the bill that we will be voting on probably now. But it will not include the language regarding utilities. That will not be in what's considered tomorrow.
So will utilities then be extended until March, like the regular?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no change in the law there.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Mitch?
You mentioned the bill from Councilmember Silverman regarding school reopening. Can you just, is that the one that you, was not agendized in the last meeting? And has that been refined?
It was not agendized at the November additional meeting, and Councilmember Silverman did not propose it at the December 1st meeting. There are 4 parts to the bill. It would create a pandemic advisory learning council. It would require the mayor to publish in-person learning threshold metrics that, if exceeded, require review of the minimum public health guidelines for in-person learning. It would call for the publication of in-person learning data, including COVID-19 testing and cases, and education details, such as the types of in-person learning operating by school and grade, and basic profile information about DCPS students attending in person. And finally, it would ensure that asymptomatic testing for COVID-19 remains in place for DCPS students and staff during the public health emergency. I was reading from the memo that Councilmember Silverman circulated.
Good.
Behind you,
Sam.
Sam.
So, Mr. Chairman, the only bill I've been hearing quite a bit about was the one for early release for 24-year-olds. I think it's final vote tomorrow. Is that correct on that bill?
Correct. That's part of the omnibus bill.
Right. So, first off, is there any indication that perhaps any minds have been changed? You think it's just going to pass tomorrow with?
Yes, the bill was approved on first reading by a unanimous vote. Now, that may not be the way you remember it because there was quite a bit of debate. The debate was over amendments, and if I remember correctly, those amendments failed on an 11-2 vote, or 2-11 vote. I have no indication that amendments are being proposed tomorrow. So, as I'm sitting here, I'm not aware that there will be any issue as it goes through.
Is it possible to hear from the chief about that bill now, since his department opposed it? I don't want to violate any rules.
I'll look to the mayor on that, if she wants to interrupt my
As I understand, the
question-taking,
police
or-
chief and the department aggressively opposed the bill. Now the police department will have to work with it, but I'll just ask.
Well, let me just start, and I will turn over to the chief. The questioner, who asked that question? Sam asked the question, started with the question about early release for 24-year-olds, which is a complicated issue, one we've very much attempted to work with the council on. You will remember that I have been very strident about making sure that victims' voices are represented in that bill, expressly represented in the bill. The council had a very long discussion about why it wasn't necessary to expressly raise up the specific crimes or how victims and judges must consider victim impacts, which was a line of questioning and argument advanced by Councilmember Mary Che. And I want to closely associate myself with her questions. And I regret that the council did not move on her amendments. I further want to say that we commented on a standalone bill as it relates to the Second Look Act. And we think it's appropriate that the council vote on it separately. There was an emergency piece of legislation that had a lot of reform measures in it, some of which we supported and some of which we didn't. And this wasn't included as part of that emergency that's being rolled up to the omnibus. So I think there's a lot of things being done at the end of the council period as it relates to public safety that will warrant our continued attention to see if they are measures that are going to make our city safer. Unfortunately, we moved several, I think it's been 3 years ago now, a record ceiling bill that has not advanced to the council that we think would actually make our city safer by having people who have served their time have the ability to better get employment. And that bill has failed to advance from the council. And so we will continue to try to work with the council on getting that done as soon as possible. Chief?
You've said, I believe, that the release of persons who have committed violent crimes, whatever the conditions, will create a public safety problem in the district. What is your comment as this bill is about to become law?
I don't, in my position as the chief of police, I don't make the law. I have to abide by it. That is the responsibility of the DC Council to make the laws for the District of Columbia. I spend a lot of time over the last 31 years with the victims of violent offenses here in our city, particularly homicides, sexual assaults. I'm not entirely convinced that their voice was heard in this instance, because when I speak to some of those folks now, they're unaware that this is even going on. So, at the end, I can respectfully disagree with the passage of this legislation. And I think I will continue to disagree with it. But at the end of the day, as a law enforcement officer in the District of Columbia, I'll have to abide by it.
Thank you.
Might you veto the bill, Mayor?
Again, I'm going to look at it closely to the omnibus to see what's in it and what's not in it. I expressed some concern about rolling the Second Look Act up into an omnibus, and I think that's why it doesn't have the attention from the public that I think it warrants. And I regret that it doesn't raise up the victims' voices expressly as it could have, as was suggested by Councilmember Che.
That's what I was afraid of, Mr. Sherwood. You're looking to me to now respond to the response to me. And I want to be respectful of the fact that this is a joint press conference. So let me just say that, there are very serious arguments to be made with regard to this legislation. The council did debate this extensively at its last meeting. I want to be respectful of the arguments that have been made on both sides. A majority of the council, which included me, supported the legislation as it has moved forward, and I expect there will be that it will be approved tomorrow. I don't know that I want to say more at this press conference. Again, trying to be respectful, but I will urge that folks who want to understand this better can look at the committee report. And the committee report not only sets forth what the committee's reasoning is, but also attaches testimony, and the testimony, some of it is in opposition. So all the arguments are there for anybody to see and form their own conclusion. Further questions regarding the council meeting, Mr. Rice?
Could you comment briefly on the Bruce Monroe Extension Disposition Authority? Because I've heard some opposition to it from the Park Morton tenants, public housing tenants, who say this just further extends the uncertainty, if I understand it correctly, that they face about their future.
Well, there are a couple of things I could say. In essence, what the legislation does is extend disposition authority when the council approves that a property that's owned by the district, the Bruce Monroe site where the former Bruce Monroe School was, is going to be disposed of by the district government for development. When we do that, it's time limited. I think it's 2 years. And so given litigation that's occurred around that project, this is to extend that authority. Nothing more, nothing less. The other answer I would give is this. We could honor what some of those who've objected want, but the effect of that would be basically to start over. And it's not the feeling of the council, and certainly we haven't heard this from the executive, that we want to start over. So there have been arguments that have been raised by folks before the zoning commission where they were not successful, before the Court of Appeals, and I wouldn't say they were successful. What the Court of Appeals said was that the zoning commission didn't explain itself in its order. So zoning commission, please explain yourself. Maybe we agree, maybe we would disagree. But that's all that is. And in light of that, it's the feeling of the council, and I expect that legislation will be approved tomorrow, that we should continue as had been planned.
I have about your appointment to the advocacy group for the archives.
Yes, I appreciate that you asked me that because it reminds me every 2 weeks that that's pending. It is important, and I don't want to make light of that, but it just, I haven't.
It really is important because, if I may say, it's one of the things we need if we want to be a full-fledged state. We need a full-fledged archives.
Yes, and I agree with that we should have a full-fledged archives, and the current situation is not desirable. And in fact, the mayor announced plans a couple of years ago for a new location, as you know, at UDC. And this is to help the council, this advisory board, so that we have really the best recommendations. If there are no other questions, thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to stick around in case somebody thinks of something later.
Okay, thank you very much. So we will move to our COVID update. And I am showing on the screen now our regular report of our experience with COVID across 4 categories, including the level of community spread, our health system capacity, our public health system capacity, and community engagement. And you will note that we are in the red in one category with daily case rates over a 7-day period. We reported this morning 164 new cases, and sadly, a DC woman who lost her life to the virus. We also shared on Thursday that when we spoke about our vaccination plan, we want and we have reason for hope that we're getting on the other side of this virus, but we're also in a very perilous time of the year. We need people to take the surge in cases very seriously. And sadly, we will soon hit a milestone in America's experience with COVID, with 300,000 Americans having died from COVID. And so for those of you who are following the rollout very carefully, you know it's on every channel all day since this weekend. On Friday, as Dr. Nesbitt described, the Food and Drug Administration might act, and it did. On Friday, the Food and Drug Administration authorized the Pfizer vaccine. On Saturday, the CDC Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices voted to recommend the use of the vaccine, and I am told that those recommendations are the gold standard for vaccine use in the United States. And yesterday, the director of the CDC approved the recommendations from that committee, making them the official CDC recommendations on immunization in the United States. And after all of that review, and by people who have dedicated their lives to public health, both the FDA and the CDC concluded that the Pfizer vaccine is safe and effective for people who are 16 years old and older. So we will continue to share that information as it is made available. We have shared just some facts about the vaccine trial and that have been all over the news as well. But this year, more than 40,000 people participated in the Pfizer vaccine trial. Tens of thousands participated in the other vaccine trials, including the Moderna trial. And this means that no one is taking the vaccine going forward will be the first to take it. With 2 doses, the vaccine has proven to be 95% effective. And it is expected that some people may have an immune response to receiving the vaccine, such as a sore arm or fatigue, headaches, muscle pains, and chills. And this is normal and expected and revolves shortly after the vaccine has been administered. So we want everybody to find the facts, get the facts, so that you can, with your healthcare provider, get any questions that you have answered. And as we shared last week, 6 sites in the district received the initial allotment of 6,825 doses. These sites will partner with other hospitals and healthcare providers across the city to begin to vaccinate frontline health workers. We expect that Howard University and George Washington University will have their vaccines today. We also expect that Children's National, MedStar Georgetown, and MedStar Washington will receive their vaccine on Tuesday. And finally, we expect Kaiser Permanente to receive their vaccines on Wednesday. And so you can see that chart in front of you. And for a number of reasons, which Dr. Nesbitt went over in detail last week, these sites may not necessarily begin to deliver the vaccines the same day that they receive the doses. So we know that for our frontline healthcare workers, this has been a very difficult year, and we're very proud that DC's bravest at Fire and EMS will be among the first in the district to receive the long-awaited COVID vaccine. DC Health has arranged for Kaiser Permanente to deliver the vaccine to Fire and EMS members beginning this Thursday, December 17th. And as of today, and today, I should say, I'm very pleased to be joined by several members who have volunteered to be amongst the first in the department to get vaccinated and to help us spread the word about the vaccine. Chief Donnelly is here, and thank you, Chief, for joining us. He's joined by Lieutenant Keisha Jackson and Lieutenant Joseph Paparillo. almost got it. Thanks, Lieutenant, for being here. And I know that they are going to be pleased to answer any questions that you have about their experience this year and why they are going to be among the first to get the vaccine. I think we're going to play a video, and we'll do that now.
Hi, my name is Lieutenant Keisha Jackson, and I'm getting vaccinated for my city. In the last 9 months, I've seen COVID devastate my department. I've seen my brothers and sisters go into the hospital. I've seen them with severe symptoms, things that we never thought we would see. This virus has taken over all of us, especially first responders. I'm getting vaccinated. I'm getting vaccinated for my coworkers, I'm getting vaccinated for my family, and I'm getting vaccinated to make a change and to try to send a message. My mother died when I was 5. My father is everything to me. He's my world. And it's just him and I in the house. And if I don't get it for any other reason, I have to get it for my daddy. I have to make sure he's safe. Whenever I come home from work every day, I have an anxiety about passing something on to him. If I can keep him here just a little bit longer, then that's what I'm going to do. Regardless of what happens, I have to make sure my family and I are safe. As Mayor Bowser says, we're all in this together, and we will all get through this together.
Lieutenant. And before we take questions from the chief and the lieutenants, I just want to also give everybody a reminder about our bridge fund. This is a fund that the city has invested $100 million in to help our businesses get to the other side of this this pandemic. And we should remind everybody that DC businesses hire DC residents and have allowed thousands of families to pay their bills, their mortgages, put their kids through school, and have a wonderful life in this city. So when we invest in businesses, we're investing in workers, and we're investing in bringing our city back from this pandemic. So please go to coronavirus.dc.gov/bridge fund to learn what's available. And weekly, Deputy Mayor Falchicchio hosts a check-in with the business community, and where you can find out more detailed information about the bridge fund. We focused first on hotels who have been devastated by this pandemic, followed by restaurants, and this week we'll focus on retail establishments. So please go to coronavirus.dc.gov/bridge fund and also tune in to the weekly DEMPED check-in. We'll take your questions.
Questions, Greg?
Okay, thank you.
No.
Okay. Who has a question?
Well, I have a question that's off topic of what the chief is here for, so I'll let anybody who wants to ask questions of him first.
I'm sorry?
I have a question off topic of the events this past weekend.
Okay. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, so on the topic of this past weekend, I'm hoping that you can comment as well, the chief, on how you feel skirmishes were handled between the groups that were out here in the city. And can you comment on perceptions that the Proud Boys get treated favorably by DC police?
Sure. So we anticipated that there was going to be conflicts coming up this weekend. What we do at the police department is we try to prevent that from occurring. We try to be there. We try to get between opposing groups, particularly when it results in physical confrontations. I don't know how much time you've spent in that environment. It's very difficult when a confrontation like that occurs to determine on who's on what side. The police get involved. They break it up. If people can be appropriately charged, then they're placed under arrest. So I think it's unfortunate if somebody feels like somebody was treated differently, but there was no intention by the police department to treat anybody any differently from anybody else. Our intention was to prevent folks from getting hurt.
At this point, would MPD characterize any group as being the aggressors over what we saw during the weekend?
What we saw when we did have conflict, there appeared to be mutual combatants on the scene. We had large numbers of folks who self-identified as Proud Boys. I don't think we've had those types of numbers in the District of Columbia before. We had smaller numbers, in my estimation, of folks who I would describe as anti-Trump groups. It was probably a ratio of about 6 or 7 to 1. So it was really, incumbent upon us to ensure that everybody was safe in this environment. As you know, we had a critical stabbing on 11th Street, 500 block of 11th Street, where a person nearly lost their lives as a result of that stabbing. But at the end of the day, considering the volume of people that came, considering the volume of folks that seemed inclined to get into physical confrontations, I was pretty impressed with the police response.
So considering the 6 to 1 ratio you're estimating, you still would say that there was about even aggression on both sides of this?
On the scenes where there were physical confrontations, there seemed to be mutual combatants, yes.
Okay. And then I have a question, for the mayor, did you want to respond to any of that about how the city responded to confrontations?
Well, I think what we see is that we have we had people who came here. These Proud Boys are avowed white nationalists and have been called to stand up against a fair and legal election, and that's what they're doing. So we can talk about police tactics, but what we really need to be talking about is how, as a country, we are allowing people, Proud Boys to pundits to members of Congress, to continue to speak against a fair election. That's what it is. This is a symptom. This is a symptom of this hateful rhetoric, anti-science noise, and people who refuse to accept the results of a fair American election.
Thank you. And then one more related question. A lot of the skirmishes that we saw out there over the weekend took place near and around Harry's Bar, where people were also observed gathering in large crowds and flouting all the city's mask restrictions. People were also stabbed nearby that location, as you mentioned. So is the city considering taking any action against Harry's Bar, implementing any citations against that restaurant?
Our understanding, and we've had our investigators go out, is that Harry's Bar was not open after 4 p.m. on Friday or Saturday. And this was part of our discussions with Harry's prior to the weekend. So I don't know that we could directly relate any of the unrest to the establishment.
Thank you.
Yes.
For the chief, I think you mentioned 4 different churches that had property destruction could you remind us of those names again, and then more details about this destruction? Did all 4 have Black Lives Matter signs taken down? Or
the answer to that question is no. I think that it was different at each location. I can give you the locations, and what I would say is there could potentially be more. These are the 4 that we know of. So it's the Mount Vernon Place United Methodist Church, which is on Massachusetts Avenue, the Metropolitan AME Church, which is on M Street in Northwest, Asbury United Methodist Church, which is on 11th Street, and the Luther Place Memorial Church. And it was destruction of property at each of these locations. And, I don't think I have to say this, but whenever anyone attacks our places of worship, I think it's unsettling for all of us. So to the extent that folks can take a look at the images that we have, and we have some really good images at a couple of those locations of suspects that were involved in this destruction of property. If we can make sure that those folks are held accountable, that would be helpful to us.
is any of this being investigated as a hate crime or hate crimes?
They all are.
They all are, okay.
Yes.
Were they burning the Black Lives Matter flags at all of them, or, the signs?
I know in one instance, a banner was set on fire, but there was definitely destruction of property at each of these locations.
Is the burning of the Black Lives Matter placard a hate crime? Or
It could potentially be a hate crime, and that's the way we're investigating these cases. So you need more information to determine if it is a hate crime, but preliminarily we're investigating them as potential hate crimes.
I don't agree with this, but some people on Twitter have said that the city is not treating the burning of the American flag as a hate crime. Is there a difference? in the previous demonstrations of the last few months?
I'm not sure if I understand the question.
Some people on Twitter have said you're not treating the hate crime, the burning of the American flag, but you're treating the hate crime, the burning of the Black Lives Matter sign.
Yeah, if you could show me the relationship between hate and the burning of our flag, that would be helpful.
Okay.
I think when you're talking about a sign at a religious institution, I think it's more likely than not that is involving hate.
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. My questions are related to the vaccination. Do you have any estimate time for the vaccination of the city residents? And if there are any plan of the vaccination for children?
Well, we discussed last week a phased approach to how the vaccine will roll out in the district. We discussed with some detail the number of vaccines that are available in this phase, which is 6,825. We don't know how much we will get in subsequent tranches of the delivery. And I'm going to ask Dr. Nesbitt to talk to you about the various phases in our plan and how the scientific community is approaching people under 16 years of age.
Sure, and we have been in, there's a couple of challenges that we have before us in terms of our ability to move through different phases, and our partners in the region are working with us in terms of our ability to move at the same pace as other states throughout the country. As you know, Mayor Bowser has been working to advocate on behalf of the district residents to the leadership of Operation Warp Speeds and leading some of those collaborative discussions throughout the region using some of the established infrastructure that we have, such as the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, and even our DC Hospital Association has been communicating effectively as well. This weekend, we were able to work collaboratively with the state of Virginia, and they will be working with us to potentially provide to us, and we're finalizing the details of this, to provide additional doses of vaccine that will allow the district, through our closed pod structure, to vaccinate healthcare workers who reside in Northern Virginia and work in the district, to vaccinate them through the closed pods in the healthcare facilities that they work. That will allow us to activate our long-term care facilities where our residents and healthcare workers live, which some states are doing this week. We have to be able to vaccinate individuals who are in the higher risk groups before we can move to phase 2 and phase 3, where the general public is. We can't provide timelines, as the mayor has mentioned, in terms of what dates, what weeks we will get to the general public in phase 3, or when we will get to other risk groups in phase 2, because we simply don't know how much vaccine we will get and when. And that's based on a number of factors. Vaccine is produced in all pharmaceuticals, in fact, are produced in some of the most tightly controlled conditions that have some of the most high quality control conditions of anything that we consume or that we put in our bodies. So someone can tell you that X number of doses are produced every week, but if those vaccines don't meet certain quality standards, they're not going to be moved out to parts of the country to be provided to states. So we're getting 6,825 doses this week. We'll know sometime this week how many we're getting next week, and so on and so forth, of the Pfizer vaccine. The Moderna vaccine, we understand, will go before the FDA for emergency use authorization, similar to the Pfizer vaccine going through that process last week. And as you saw, and you've put the timeline together in your head, the advisory committee met on Thursday and other actions were taken such that vaccine is arriving in communities sometime between Monday and Wednesday this week to allow people to begin to be vaccinated. But we don't know when other companies that are manufacturing that are conducting clinical trials that are in the phase 3 time period are going to be submitting their request for an emergency use authorization to the FDA. In terms of when the pediatric population may be vaccinated, There are not many pediatric individuals enrolled in these trials at this point. Moderna has begun to enroll some people younger than the age of 16, but we do not have significant data on the pediatric population as it relates to safety and efficacy at this point to be able to indicate when that population will begin to be vaccinated.
Yep.
Donnelly, will you talk about the FEMS approach to the member vaccination?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the fire department got word last week that we were going to be able to receive the vaccine in that first dose later this week. And we started engaging our members. And the members we're engaging first are our members that are on the front lines every day, that are out there in contact with people with COVID, and then coming back to the fire stations where they live in very tight quarters. We've seen pretty widespread COVID with over 250 cases in the fire department. So we believe this is a very important step for us to be able to maintain services and to be able to support our employees, keep the citizens and the workers safe.
Thank you. Yes, Sam? Oh, I'm sorry. Let me say.
Sorry. And
can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, my name is Carmen Rodriguez. I'm a correspondent for Anadolu from Turkish. Yeah, Anadolu, Latin America.
Okay.
Yeah, and how will be the vaccine store taking into account that it requires certain temperature?
Well, if we could go back to the slide where the vaccine has been distributed, these are all healthcare facilities that can support its proper storage.
And the last question about that, yeah. What will be the protocol to follow with people who have any illness or allergies?
Dr. Nesbitt?
Sure. So there are a number as a requirement for any state to participate in the vaccine program. And any of our healthcare providers who are partnering as part of the state's program, they must report any adverse events through a number of initiatives, including the vaccine adverse event reporting system. There are also voluntary systems that individuals can report directly in, including apps that can be downloaded on a smartphone.
If I could follow up with Dr. Nesbitt on vaccine. How many doses, do you have a number of how many doses that you'll be getting from Virginia to vaccinate Northern Virginia residents who work in DC healthcare facilities?
We estimate approximately 8,000.
So you're going to get more doses from Governor Northam than you're going to get from the federal government?
But potentially next week, not this week.
Okay, and you're going to target those towards long-term care facilities?
No, they will go to the Pfizer vaccine. It will go to our hospitals, those same 6 facilities, but it allows us to be able to activate a long-term care partnership.
Sir, I got you.
When in order to activate the long-term care partnership, you have to allocate 50% of the doses that you're getting from the federal government. And with the amount of vaccine we're getting from the federal government, if we did that, we'd have to reduce by 50, cut 6,825 doses into 3,400. And that was not sufficient to be able to move out to our hospitals for them to vaccinate their workers. So we kept that solely as a program that went out to our hospitals. So getting more vaccine from our partners in the region, which they were so gracious to be able to do, recognizing the benefit it would extend to our region as a whole, allows us to be able to activate our long-term care partnership, similar to what some states did at the outset of their program, and start to vaccinate residents and workers in long-term care facilities in the coming weeks.
Maryland, have they indicated whether or not they're receptive?
We are in discussions with them as well to be able to secure a commitment of a transfer of vaccines for them as well.
And then when you're giving out these doses, this first 6,000, you're going to give out 6,000 doses, not hold 3,000 back for the second round.
No, we are not to hold back the second dose.
And then, I appreciate your patience with all these questions.
That's okay.
Can you tell us what metrics you'll release, what data you will release, and whether the number of people vaccinated will become one of the metrics we see on your dashboard? And will you update us each day with how many people are vaccinated and kind of what sectors they're from? And
yeah, so dashboards are they're a gift and a curse at the same time. So we have the ability to track who is getting vaccinated in order to, we have to track that because we have to make sure that anyone getting vaccinated with Pfizer is getting their second dose at around day 21. Anyone getting vaccinated with Moderna gets vaccinated at day 28. The extent to which we're going to invest a substantial amount of time to create a public dashboard that creates at a micro level that this number of people who work in a grocery store have been vaccinated versus this number of people in an office building has been vaccinated versus this number of DC workers who live in Maryland and Virginia. I'm not convinced of the value of investing manpower hours to create that level of a public dashboard, how that pays off for public interest versus how it pays off for our ability to move the needle in Maryland, DC, and Virginia. We will have the ability to track the amount of vaccine that comes into the district. We will have the ability to track who has actually been vaccinated, and we will have the ability to remind them of when their first and second doses due. And the way that we are allowing people to schedule for appointments allows us to make sure we are moving in appropriate phases and have estimates of what proportion of any group in a population category is being vaccinated. Rolling that line, what we call line level data, or aggregate data and breaking it down into specific lines and tracking that at the same way that we give you a specific number of new cases every day, I'm not sure that we're going to build that infrastructure on top of the system that we have.
What will you?
So the extent to which we're going to clean data nightly, or to then be able to put it out to you to say, X number of grocery store workers in the district who live in Maryland were vaccinated tomorrow, I'm not sure we're building that dashboard for you.
Dr. Nesbitt just told you what we have and what we will be able to follow, and we'll work on what the cadence of reporting and how we can report it. Yes.
Dr. Nesbitt, you had mentioned reaching vaccinations for the vulnerable population. I know you said you can't give exact numbers, but if you haven't already, is there a percentage you know of in the district of a vulnerable population that needs to be vaccinated before you could start moving in? And with the dosages that you're expecting to get with the partnership that you've talked about, where that gets us to in the district?
I think I misunderstand your question because you said I couldn't do something.
You said that not specific numbers yet, but in terms of the vulnerable population in DC, what percentage needs to be vaccinated before we can move to the next phase?
Do we have, before you answer, let me just ask, do we have the graphic that shows the phases that we could pull up quickly? I know it's not in this slide deck. Is it in something else that we could pull up as Dr. Nesbitt responds?
I want to restate Stephanie's question because I think I'm misunderstanding, and I think it's partially inaccurate in a previous understanding. So we've published in the DC COVID-19 vaccination program the population estimates for each group. And what I think I'm hearing you say is we don't have a timeline for how we're going to move from one group to the other, but we're not going to completely finish group or phase 1A before we move to phase 1B. So do you get that part? So we estimate that there's 85,100 people in phase 1A, then about 310,772 in phase 1B, right? And phase 1B includes individuals who are over the age of 65. It also includes individuals who have a chronic health condition. So when you say the vulnerable population, those individuals to me is what is defined as vulnerable. Do we have concurrence there?
Which
Okay,
phase?
great. Phase 1B.
1B.
Right, so we have some concurrence there. So from my perspective, we don't have to finish phase 1B before we move into phase 1-2. Do we have some agreement there? Okay, great. So when you say I don't know something, I'm confused about what I said I didn't know.
No, that you weren't ready to give specific numbers yet. But in order to move to the next phase, my question is around what percentage, I guess, of 1B needs to be vaccinated.
Okay, because I just gave some very specific numbers, so I wanted to, right. So what we understand about the population's readiness to accept the vaccine is that in the essential workers group, The readiness for accepting the vaccine based on race and ethnicity could range from somewhere between 40% for some groups to as high as 95% for other groups. As a collective group, it's maybe somewhere about 60 to 70%. So if we're talking about moving from phase 1A to phase 1B, we may end up somewhere about having 60% of that group vaccinated before we move to phase 1B.
And then
Is that helpful context?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you. And then to follow up with the mayor, if you don't mind, Mayor Bowser, I believe you had said previously that you would take the vaccine. Do you still feel that you should, given the number of vulnerable people we have in the district? The vaccine ahead of someone else who might be more vulnerable?
In phase 1B.
But I'm just asking, do you still feel officials should, given that there are others out there that are
I do.
vulnerable?
I feel that everybody who wants it should have it. Okay, let me start there. And I know that as we go through the schedule, I think properly looks at DC government, our first responders, and then our essential workers and critical care workers. And that's the group I fall in, if that's your question.
Yeah, more so, if there's an older person who, is waiting to take this vaccine, if there are officials that maybe think that they could wait, should they do so?
Well, I think that my officials and employees who are going to work in person are exactly where they need to be in this protocol. Yes, Sam.
So I want a question for Chief Donnelly. First off, how are you determining who gets the vaccine in the fire department? And are AMR workers also part of those people you're vaccinating?
So first, we'll start with the fire department people. We're starting with our operations folks. And in sort of answer to your question, maybe why I'm getting it, I'm as the leader of the department, I'm going to do something. I won't have my people do anything I won't do. And there's been enough concern about the vaccine, as you see in the country, about its safety. And I know that my involvement has caused people to say they will take the vaccine. So I think that's a really important investment in my people. In terms of where we go with that, we're working with the operations folks. We've started a survey. Obviously, it's an optional but highly encouraged vaccine. And we're getting those back and scheduling them as they come in. We'll start at 140 people a day and go until we've used up our vaccine or we have everybody that is willing to get it at that time. As far as AMR, I think I'm going to have to get back to you. Unless somebody knows the number off the top of their head.
Sure. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it is phase 1A includes EMS providers. So it is not closed to FEMS. But we are starting with a rollout this week to FEMS.
Just fire EMS people this week, not AMR people at all?
They will be rolled into the schedule as we have more vaccine. Actually, the group is EMS providers. It is not just fire and EMS.
But this
Similarly,
first group...
when we get to law enforcement, it won't just be MPD. It will be all law enforcement.
And could you one more time give us the number? I've heard, what are we getting in DC?
6,825.
Okay.
Dr. Nesbitt, and we continue to work with a partnership with our regional partners to get additional vaccine. The number that we have a commitment from Virginia is 8,000. And we do not have that.
Is DC getting less than states?
We are getting the amount that is proportional to our population. Yes, and we're gonna we have a final round here. Tom.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question about the electors today.
Yes.
At 2 o'clock, if we let you out of here.
You may be here, but I will be leaving shortly.
Today at 2 o'clock, the district's 3 electors will cast, I wrote this down, will cast our city's official votes for president. It's a bigger deal than usual, as you just mentioned earlier, because President Trump has been trying to overturn the election. But why has your office and Secretary of the District, Kimberly Bassett, kept secret the list of who you invited personally to attend the historic ceremony. I asked your office Thursday morning, 4 days ago, a simple question. Who was invited? The invitations had already gone out because I've seen one. Yet as I sit here right now, your office still has kept the list secret. May I ask you why? Did the size of the invitation list violate your own order limiting crowd gatherings during the virus?
As you know, Tom, my order does not apply to official government business. So if I needed to have, just like the elections, for example, didn't apply to the number of people that could be at a polling booth. And it wouldn't apply to the number of people that could be at the gathering of the Electoral College. Although I think that we have made every effort to keep that number down and to limit the types of ceremonial things that we would normally have at the Electoral College. For example, the presentation of colors or the flag will be foregone so that we wouldn't have those 4 or 5 young people present. We won't have someone there present singing the national anthem, which we would normally have at this event. And we don't have it open to the public like it normally is. I've been an elector, and we normally have it in a place. I think the last one was in the council chambers. The time before that, it was in the Ceremonial building where all of the members of the public, members of the press could come to the event. It is my recollection that we have invited 2 members of the council. We've invited part of our statehood delegation. We have invited leadership from the DC Democratic Party. We have invited the members of the Board of Elections. And I think that's, I don't remember, and the electors.
Mayor, I appreciate that, and it makes perfectly good sense. What doesn't make sense is I simply asked for a list of who you invited. And for 2 days, I was told the list was being prepared, even though the list had been sent out. And for the last 2 days, my inquiries weren't even responded to. Will you commit to have the Secretary of the District or your press office simply give us a list of who's going there? The fact that it is strictly limited makes it more interesting to who's going to be there. My understanding, again, is I could be wrong, but the list was so large that it would have violated, those people would not need to be there to carry out the official function of the district.
No, you are wrong.
Well,
there is not a large list. And probably we were confirming the agenda. Having a list of people without the agenda probably doesn't make a lot of sense. But it's not a big show, if that's what you are suggesting. What we are doing, and what is also important, is that we are using the setup that Events DC has created that will allow virtual events to happen in a pretty standard setting. And so that's where the Electoral College will meet.
It makes perfectly good sense. Why is the list of who is actually invited secret? I don't understand that. And it's such a minor question. I feel irritated even asking it 5 times.
Well, I feel irritated hearing it 5 times, but I'm happy to let people know. I just kind of read to you the categories of people who will be involved.
That's not, I have a part of the list, Mayor, and that's not everyone who's invited.
Okay, what is the list do you would like to confirm?
I want to know the list of the people who are authorized to go to the ceremony today where the electors are going to cast.
Who are you talking about that you need me to confirm?
You have not named all the ones that I know.
Then maybe you don't know.
Well, then why don't I have the list?
Didn't I just say that I would release it with the agenda?
I already have the agenda. It's a very nice agenda. It's very impressive. It's very great. It's a great thing to do. The votes are going to be counted, but the people in the audience, the live audience, it's going to be on Cable 16 if anyone's listening to this rant. I just don't understand why it's so secret you won't give us a list. I mean, thank you. I won't bug you anymore. I would like to have it today, though, because I asked for it Thursday morning. Thank you.
And your point in this rant is that there are too many people that are going to be there?
No, the point is I would like to know as a citizen of the city who's there for this historic moment.
Got it. Thank you. Yes.
I have two quick questions, if I could. First, we could hear from the two lieutenants.
Yes, please.
And I'm just kind of wondering if you could maybe each tell us if you guys had actually tested positive through all this. We know from the chief so many firefighters have. How many times, if you have, had to quarantine through all this, and just what it's like being on the front line and now being on the verge of being the first two in the city to get the vaccine. I know it's a lot in there, but whatever you guys are comfortable with, I appreciate it. Thank you.
I would also like to speak candidly. I have not tested positive. I have tried to do everything to keep myself safe. My position in the department is dealing with a lot of the First Amendment demonstrations. So sometimes a lot of times it will cause for me to go out in operations and deal with our visitors into the city. Again, I've just tried to do everything to keep myself safe and my family safe. But no, I've never tested positive. My main thing in doing this is I had a lot of hesitation, and when we first started discussing getting a vaccination, I was definitely one of the ones who was opposed to it, against it, was not going to do it. But you go through life, and certain situations come up in your life that will change you. For me, it's trying to send also a message to Black and brown people that look like me. It is my race that is dying at a high rate. I had a nurse who we've been friends since I was 10 years old, and she is my best friend. And she is now sick, very sick. So I'm trying to do what I can to get a message out to whoever I can get the message out. I've never known her to have health problems, but she is severely sick. And I'm wishing her all the best, praying. Again, as I said in my video, my worst fear is giving it or passing something to my dad. I am the sole provider, meaning I keep him in the house, I grocery shop, meds, cook. Every single day I come home to him. And my worst fear is contributing to just making him sick. So again, I was that person. I can admit I was that person who was definitely against it. I was not going to do it. Let me wait a year. Let me see what happens. I can't afford to do that anymore. I can't. So I have to step out on my faith and believe that I'm going to be fine. And that is my belief. That's what I'm going to do. Again, it's my race who is leaving here at an alarming rate. So that is my story. Thank you.
Thank you. Lieutenant?
Good afternoon. First, I'd like to thank the mayor and Chairman Mendelson and everybody in the leadership team. It's a very symbolic gesture that's not occurring in many states across the country, and that's putting its first responders first. My brothers and sisters have worked tirelessly under a great deal of stress over the last 9 months and have worked admirably and I think very successfully in battling this invisible enemy in the streets. And our biggest fears as providers is giving it to our patients and bringing it home to our families. And this is the first step in rounding that corner, in preventing those things from happening. And we're very proud to be here and to say thank you for considering us and letting us be a part of that group. So vaccinating for the city, for ourselves, and for our families.
Thank you. And then if I could just follow up with an off-topic question, Mayor and Chief Newsham, for the two of you. Chief, first to you, we know you're leaving to go to Prince William. There's going to be a protest tomorrow in Prince William County of people who are opposed to your being named the chief there. Just wondering, what would you say to those people who may have concerns about you coming to Prince William County to give them some assurance that either you hear their concerns or to relieve their concerns? And then Mayor Bowser, the last time I asked you, you were not clear on a timeline for the chief's departure. I'm just wondering if you have any more clear date there.
Sure. Let me start, Chief, and I'll kick it over to you. And having been in the position once and now for a second time of picking a chief, of police. It is an awesome responsibility, and it is among one of the most important personnel selections that a mayor or chief executive will make. And now, especially with the climate that we are in, it is, public officials are under a lot of pressure to make the right choices. And I think that having a person who's been committed to law enforcement for 31 years and has served a major city for that entire career certainly is a bonus to any department who is looking for a new police chief. So while we are very sad that the chief has decided to move on, he served us with distinction, and he's going to be great wherever he goes. Now, no mayor wants to be the one that has to give the great recommendation on their chief of police going someplace else, but that's how it goes. And I think that the folks in Virginia will find the same thing. Now, it's unusual. I don't know that it's happened that a chief has moved on and stayed in the region. And so I'm thinking that there may be some good benefit that the people of DC and the Metropolitan Police Department will get out of that. As far as our timeline goes, I continue to do the work that I need to do, and I will come out with an announcement soon. Thank you.
So listening to the mayor say that, I have nothing to say to her other than thank you. I think she knows how I feel about her and her leadership here in the city. It's been nothing short of remarkable considering the things that we've been through in Washington, D.C. since I've been the chief of police. So again, Mayor Bowser, thank you from the bottom of my heart for saying that. With regards to criticism, when you're in this line of work from time to time, people are critical of you. One of the things that I've learned in a leadership position is really what you have to do when folks are critical is you have to really listen. Some of that criticism is valid, and you have to change accordingly. So if there are folks out there who are critical of me, either here in the district or in Prince William County, they can rest assured that I will listen to that criticism. If that criticism is valid, I will adjust accordingly.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, Stephanie, you have the last one?
Just a few, if it's okay, but I'm just going to spit fire across just to make sure. Chief, since you finished, I'm going to first ask you, your response to leaving the department and what shape you feel you're leaving the department in, what message you have to the city. Mayor Bowser, when you plan to get the vaccination, and then also to Lieutenant Joseph, if you could just please confirm your last name for us. And just a quick question, Lieutenant Jackson, you really did answer this in your response for Lieutenant Joseph. What do you say to the people who you get pushback from about this vaccine, if you are getting pushback? If not, that's fine.
So I think the question was, how do I feel that the police department is being left?
Leaving the department, what shape do you feel the department is being left in, and what's your message to everyone?
You have one of the best police departments in the country, if not the best, and we went through that transition from not being a very good police department to being one of the best. While I was on the department, it was a great ride. We have tremendous leadership here at MPD. I feel extremely comfortable that this organization will continue to move forward in a positive way, the way that we have done for the better part of the last 2 decades.
What was your question?
When do you plan on taking the vaccination?
I will take it when my turn comes up, and I don't know when that is.
It's Paparello, and I think when we listen to our peers, we respect their decision if they choose not to take it. It's their personal choice, and I hope that everybody thinks deeply about it, relies on the science. We are medical professionals, and I trust the medical professionals that have made this and the scientists that have made it and the process that has occurred, and that's the main reason that I'm taking it. I trust in the process, and I hope my coworkers will do the same and protect themselves and protect others.
Thank you, everybody.